This lesson is transformations, reflections, and/or flips in layman terms. Part A, using board number 18, the blue pawns and the red pawn markers. You can see that this board is laid out in 4 quadrants, just like a regular graph would be. So we can see that in the first quadrant, all coordinates are positive, both the x and the y values. If we move to quadrant 2, we can see that x is positive and the y values are negative, and so on, and you continue on. So you should probably review with students what the 4 quadrants are, and also whether x and or y are positive or negative. So let's start off by plotting the coordinates for a rectangle. We're going to do 1 minus 1, 1 minus 6, 4, negative 6, and 4, negative 1. And you can see that this creates a rectangle right here, and it's 5 by 3. So what we want to do is we want to reflect this shape over the x-axis. The x-axis runs across here, and you can see that it's a dark or bold line. And what we need to do is we need to take 4 blue pawns, and we're going to reflect it. So we can see that this red pawn is exactly 1 unit away from the x-axis. So on the opposite side, just like a mirror would be, we're going to reflect it exactly 1 unit away from the x-axis. So this one here is being reflected by this pawn. Now we're going to move to this bottom one, and we're going to reflect this pawn up here. So we can count the number of units either from this pawn or from the x-axis. So we count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's going to be reflected over this x-axis right there. And then the last 2 pawns, you can see that they'll be reflected here, this one being reflected here, and this one being reflected here. So this is how you do a very simple reflection using the x-axis. If we want to take this same rectangle and reflect it over the y-axis, we need to count the number of units from the y-axis on both sides. So in this case, this pawn is 1 unit to the right, so here we'll reflect it as 1 unit to the left. Same here, this is 4 units to the right, so we'll reflect from the y-axis 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 units to the left. We do the same with the other pawns, and we end up with a 5 by 3 rectangle reflected over the y-axis. Finally, let's reflect this rectangle over this line. You can see that there are diagonal lines running from the bottom left to the top right, as well as from the top left to the bottom right. So this is a little bit more tricky. What we have to do is we have to show each pawn as a reflection on the opposite side the same distance from this line. So now, instead of measuring the sides, we're actually measuring the diagonals of the squares. So here we can see that it goes 1 full diagonal for this pawn, so from this one we move 1 full diagonal in that direction. Then we're going to reflect this pawn, and you can see that it's half, 1, 2. So it's 2 and a half, so we have half, 1, 2. Now, this is a little bit challenging for some to see, but you can see that if we were to place a mirror down here, that this would reflect here and this would reflect here. So now we're going to come to this pawn, and we're going to see how many units it's away from here in terms of diagonal. So we have 1, 2, 3 and a half. So we have half, 1, 2, 3 and a half, and that will place right there. And finally, we're going to reflect this one, and we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the diagonal, and we come right along here, and we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we place the pawn there. So another thing that you could do is you could take a piece of paper and you could draw this, and you could fold that line in half, and you could show students that the red and the blue actually fold on top of each other. But this is how you use board number 18 to perform reflections over the x, the y, and diagonal axes.